go.
Snow fell
Stay
white and
vigilant.
absolute
The
across Fort
conditions
Bragg
are
sniper
worsening.
range. The Delta Force operators, America's finest marksmen, crossed their arms and smiled thinly as the small woman stepped up to the rifle built only for hardened soldiers. "Let me take one shot," she said, her voice oddly calm. Nobody believed, nobody thought she understood the frozen wind slicing through 3 counter-rotating layers. But when the trigger released and the bullet tore through blizzard fog, every laugh died. That shot shattered the record Delta had held for 15 years. The January wind came down from the mountains like a blade. It stripped the warmth from exposed skin in seconds, turned breath into frozen crystals, reduced visibility to gray shapes in white chaos. Fort Bragg's Delta Sniper Range sat at the edge of the training grounds, a strip of frozen earth that stretched nearly 2 kilometers into wilderness. This was where America tested its best. The range was famous for one reason: crosswind. Not the predictable kind that followed weather patterns, but the chaotic collision of 3 distinct wind layers that changed direction every few seconds. Hot air from the valley floor, cold pressure from the mountains, Arctic drafts channeling through the pass. They created a shooting environment so unstable that even experienced snipers called it the lottery. Staff Sergeant Marcus Brennan stood behind the firing line, arms crossed against the cold. Around him, 6 Delta operators adjusted their scopes and calculated wind values that would be obsolete before their bullets flew. The target sat 923 meters downrange, a steel plate the size of a dinner plate mounted on a post that swayed in the gusts. 15 years, Brennan said to no one in particular. 42 attempts. Nobody's hit it since Captain Hartley in 2010. The operators knew the story. Everyone did. Captain Richard Hartley had made the shot during a freak moment of atmospheric stability, 3 seconds when all 3 wind layers aligned. The bullet had traveled through what meteorologists later called a wind tunnel of perfect conditions. Hartley had retired 2 years later. The record stood untouched. "Makes you wonder if it was skill or just luck," said Corporal Jake Morrison, squinting through his scope. Brennan replied. "Results the same." Morrison pulled his trigger. The Barrett M82A1 bucked against his shoulder, the .50 caliber round screaming downrange. Through binoculars, they watched snow spray where the bullet struck earth 2 meters left of target. "Damn," Morrison muttered, then louder, "Who wants next?" Sergeant Amy Chen stepped forward. She was Delta's best wind reader, had scored perfect marks in every condition except this one. Her calculations were precise, her breathing controlled. The rifle settled. She fired. The bullet curved right, missing by 3 meters. "The 3rd layer is fighting us," Chen said, frustration creeping into her voice. "Equipment can't track it. Changes too fast." Brennan checked his tablet. Wind sensors along the range showed chaotic readings that contradicted themselves within seconds. Temperature gradients shifted. Pressure zones swirled. It was the kind of environment that made long-range shooting feel like astrology. "Again," he ordered. They tried again and again. Each attempt failed. The Delta operators were not men and women accustomed to failure. They were the result of selection rates below 1%, training that broke most candidates, missions that demanded perfection. This range existed specifically to humble them, to remind them that mastery meant acknowledging what you couldn't control. But that didn't make failure easier to swallow. "Pack it up," Brennan finally said. "We'll try again tomorrow when conditions improve." "Sir," Morrison asked, "what if conditions don't improve? What if Hartley's shot was just that, once in a lifetime?" Brennan didn't answer because he'd been wondering the same thing. The wind howled across empty firing positions. Snow covered boot prints in minutes. The steel target swung on its post, untouched, waiting for the next person who thought they could beat the impossible. Behind them, the door to the weather station opened. She appeared like a ghost against white, small frame wrapped in an old brown parka, hood pulled up against the wind. Her hands were bare, red and chapped from cold, but she didn't seem to notice. She walked with the careful steps of someone used to ice, eyes scanning the range with an intensity that suggested she was reading something invisible. The Delta operators turned. "Who the hell is that?" Morrison asked. Brennan checked his roster. Elena Ward, civilian contractor, meteorological analysis and wind pattern specialist. A weather girl. Chen raised an eyebrow. This isn't the place for civilians. But Alina wasn't heading for the weather station. She was walking toward the firing line, notebook in one hand, pencil in the other. She stopped at the edge of the range and looked downrange, not at the target, but at the space between. Her lips moved silently, counting something. Morrison laughed. "Lost, miss?" "Weather station's that way." Elena turned. Her face was younger than Brennan expected, mid-20s maybe, but her eyes held something old, something that had seen too much wind and snow. "I'm not lost," she said quietly. "Then what are you doing here?" Chen asked, not unkindly. Alina gestured at the range. "Watching you, miss." The temperature of the conversation dropped 10 degrees. "Excuse me." Morrison stepped forward. "You're compensating for 2 wind layers," Elena said, still calm, "but there's a third layer between 800 and 200 meters. Thermal inversion from the valley. It's pushing right while your calculations expect left." Brennan studied her. "And you know this how?" "Because I've been tracking pressure systems here for 3 years. I see what your sensors can't." Morrison snorted. "Right? Because a civilian knows more about shooting than Delta snipers." "I didn't say I knew more about shooting," Elena replied. "I said I knew more about the wind." Chen exchanged glances with Brennan. The woman wasn't being aggressive. She was simply stating facts with the confidence of someone who knew what she was talking about. But knowing wind and hitting targets were very different skills. "Can you tell the difference between falling snow and a blizzard?" Morrison asked, mockery clear in his voice. Alina looked at him for a long moment. "Can you tell the difference between missing and not understanding why you missed?" The other operators laughed despite themselves. Morrison's face reddened. "All right," Brennan said, cutting the tension. "Miss Ward, we appreciate the meteorological insight, but this is a closed training exercise." Alina nodded once, but she didn't leave. Instead, she turned back to the range, watching snow patterns swirl in air currents, only she seemed to see. Her pencil moved across the notebook calculations, sketches, numbers that meant nothing to anyone but her. The Delta operators returned to their equipment, but Brennan noticed Chen watching the civilian woman with something that might have been curiosity. "She's right about the third layer," Chen said quietly. "Doesn't matter," Brennan replied. "Knowing wind doesn't mean she can shoot." "I suppose not." But as they packed weapons into cases, as snow continued to fall and wind continued to howl, Brennan found himself glancing back at Alina Ward. She stood alone at the edge of the range, a small figure against vast whiteness, her bare hands still writing notes, as if cold didn't exist. There was something about her stillness that felt wrong. Not awkward civilian stillness, but the controlled stillness of a predator waiting. He shook the thought away. She was a weather analyst, nothing more. The door to the weather station finally opened. Alina walked back, disappearing into warmth and instrumentation. The range returned to emptiness, but the feeling remained. Elena's hands shook as she closed the weather station door, not from cold. She'd long ago stopped feeling winter's bite, but from memory. The moment she'd seen the Delta operators attempting the 1923-meter shot, something had cracked open inside her, a door she'd welded shut 6 years ago. Behind it, snow and blood, and the sound of a rifle shot that changed everything. She sat at her desk, surrounded by monitors displaying wind data, temperature gradients, atmospheric pressure, but she wasn't seeing any of it. She was seeing Alaska. Elena had been 19, old enough to handle a rifle, young enough to believe nothing could hurt her. The training camp sat in the Brooks Range, 200 miles north of Fairbanks. No official designation, no military oversight, just her father, former Marine Scout sniper instructor, and 12 handpicked students who paid cash for skills the government wouldn't teach. Most people think sniping is about the shot. Thomas Ward had said, his breath frosting in air so cold it hurt to breathe. It's not. It's about the weight, the reading, the understanding that you're not fighting a target. You're negotiating with physics. Elena had grown up in that camp. While other children learned algebra, she learned ballistic coefficients. While they played sports, she tracked wind by watching birch leaves and snow crystals. While they worried about college, she worried about Coriolis effect and spin drift. Her father never treated her differently because she was small or female. A bullet doesn't choose based on gender, he'd say. It chooses the person who understands wind. And Elena understood wind. The Brooks Range was perfect for training. Wind there didn't follow patterns, it created them. Arctic air collided with Pacific moisture. Temperature inversions formed and collapsed hourly. Students who could shoot in those conditions could shoot anywhere. By 18, Elena could read wind layers the way musicians read sheet music. She saw symphony in chaos. She hit targets that made experienced shooters shake their heads. You have a gift, her father told her one evening, both of them wrapped in parkas against temperatures that would kill unprotected humans in minutes. But gifts come with responsibility. What responsibility? The decision of what to aim at. Elena hadn't understood then. She thought he meant targets. She'd been wrong. The mission came in December, not military. Thomas Ward had left that world behind. This was contracted work, the kind that paid enough to run the camp for another year. Hostage situation. Armed extremists. Someone needed extraction support from long range. I'll be back in 3 days, her father had said, checking his rifle one final time. Elena had watched him leave, helicopter disappearing into gray sky. 3 days became 4, then 5. On the 6th day, 2 men in unmarked vehicles arrived. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. The folded flag they carried said everything. Your father died accomplishing his mission, one said. He saved 4 lives. What happened? Elena's voice had sounded distant, like someone else was speaking. Complications. Wind conditions. The shot was... The man hesitated. He made a choice. Elena never learned the full details, but she knew her father well enough to piece it together. Impossible shot. Bad conditions. Decision between guaranteed hit on target and uncertain hit that might save hostages. Thomas Ward had chosen the hostages. The shot had missed. The extremists had fired back. Her father had taken a round through the throat. He'd saved all 4 hostages before bleeding out. Elena had closed the camp 2 weeks later, sold the equipment, scattered the students. She'd kept only her father's rifle and his journals, decades of wind calculations, shot records, lessons learned, and she'd made a promise to his memory she would never shoot to kill again. Not because she couldn't, but because she'd seen where that path led. She'd taken her wind, reading skills to civilian work. Military bases needed meteorological contractors. She could analyze patterns, predict conditions, and most importantly, stay away from triggers. For 6 years, the promise had held until today. Elena looked at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. Outside, Delta Force operators were failing at a shot her father would have made blindfolded. They didn't understand the range, didn't understand that wind here wasn't an obstacle to overcome. It was a language to speak. She could speak that language, but speaking it meant picking up a rifle again, meant remembering what steel and powder and recoil felt like, meant breaking the promise she'd kept since the day They'd buried her father in frozen Alaskan ground. Elena stood, walked to her locker, opened it. Inside, wrapped in cloth and untouched for 6 years, was her father's rifle, custom-built, .338 Lapua Magnum. Every scratch told a story. Every adjustment represented a lesson learned. She touched the stock, cold metal under her fingertips. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, "but I need to prove you were right about something." Tomorrow she would ask for one shot. Morning brought worse weather, the kind of blizzard that grounded helicopters and postponed training. But Delta operators didn't postpone. They adapted. Brennan stood at the firing line, watching Chen attempt the shot again. Wind howled. Snow created curtains of white that made the target invisible for seconds at a time. Chen compensated. The bullet vanished into storm. Somewhere downrange it hit earth or snow or nothing at all. Damn. Chen threw her cap on the ground. That was perfect windage, perfect elevation. What the hell am I missing? Third layer, a quiet voice said. They turned. Elena Ward stood 10 feet back. Same old parka, same bare hands, but this time she carried something, a long case, black and worn. The thermal inversion. Elena continued. It collapsed 2 seconds before you fired. Your bullet hit the shift. Morrison laughed, the sound harsh in cold air. And you would know this how?
You sound an expert.
In wind, yes. In shooting, Elena met his eyes. I've fired a rifle before. Fired a rifle. Morrison repeated, grinning at the other operators. Hear that? She's fired a rifle. Probably a .22 at a range somewhere. Morrison, Brennan warned. But Morrison was frustrated, embarrassed by repeated failures. He needed a target for that frustration, and the small civilian woman made an easy one. Tell you what, Weather Girl, you seem to know so much about this shot. Why don't you show us how it's done? The other operators shifted uncomfortably. Chen shook her head, but Elena didn't react. She just looked past Morrison, past all of them, to the target barely visible through swirling snow. Can I take one shot? She asked. The question hung in frozen air. Then Morrison laughed, really laughed, bent over, hands on knees. Oh, man. Oh, that's rich. You want to shoot. He could barely get the words out. You want to attempt a shot that's broken 40, 2 trained snipers. One shot, Elena repeated. Chen stepped forward. Miss Ward, this isn't a game. That's a .50 caliber rifle. The recoil alone could dislocate your shoulder if you're not braced properly. I know. The target's almost 2 kilometers away in blizzard conditions that make it effectively invisible. I know. And you're a civilian meteorologist with no formal sniper training. Elena finally looked at Chen. I didn't say I had no training. I said I was a civilian. Brennan studied her, the rifle case at her feet. The way she stood, weight balanced, relaxed but ready, the calluses on her trigger finger that he'd noticed yesterday but dismissed. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. We're, Alaska, Brooks, range, with my father. Your father military, scout sniper instructor, retired. Brennan processed this. And he taught you everything. Morrison had stopped laughing. Wet, you're serious. You actually think you can make this shot? Elena knelt, opened the rifle case. The weapon inside made Chen whistle quietly. Custom, built high-end optics, maintained with obvious care. Where'd you get that? Morrison asked, attitude shifting from mockery to suspicion. Was. He's dead. The brutal honesty killed the remaining jokes. Elena lifted the rifle, checked the action with practiced efficiency, loaded a single round. 5 pairs of eyes watched every movement. Miss Ward, Brennan said carefully, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you qualified to take this shot? Elena settled into firing position, adjusting the bipod with precise micro movements. No, she said. I'm qualified to make this shot. There's a difference. Morrison opened his mouth. Brennan silenced him with a look. One round and said, If you miss, you leave the range. Agreed. Agreed. Alina pressed her cheek to the stock. Her right hand touched snow, bare fingers feeling something invisible. Her breathing slowed, stopped. The Delta operators watched in silence. Chen thought, she moves like she's done this 1,000 times. Morrison thought, she's going to embarrass herself. Brennan thought, this woman knows something we don't. Helena's finger found the trigger. Her lips moved, counting wind shifts only she could sense. Third layer rotating. 1. The trigger broke clean. The rifle's roar split frozen air. Recoil drove back into Elena's shoulder. Familiar violence forgotten for 6 years, now returned like an old enemy. The bullet left the barrel at 850 meters per second. Supersonic crack following milliseconds behind. Then physics took over. The bullet traveled through the first wind layer. Valley air pushing left at 15 knots compensated for in Alina's calculations. At 400 meters, it hit the second layer. Mountain wind pushing right at 20 knots. The bullet curved, following a path that looked wrong but was exactly correct. At 800 meters, the thermal inversion caught it, the invisible third layer that sensors couldn't track, that experience couldn't predict, that Delta's best shooters had missed every time. Hot air rising from cold ground, creating a temperature gradient that bent bullet trajectory like light through a prism. Elena had felt it, not with instruments, but with skin and instinct and lessons learned in Alaska, where getting wind wrong meant dying of cold in the dark. The bullet rode the thermal wave, curved impossibly, emerged from the other side on a trajectory that made no sense unless you understood that air wasn't uniform. It was layered, textured. At 500 meters, snow tried to slow it. Crystals vaporized against copper jacket. Speed bled away, but there was enough, just enough. At 923 meters, traveling 450 meters per second, the 338 Lapua round struck steel. Ping, the sound carried back through storm like a bell. The target's LED indicator flashed green, confirmation of center mass hit. Absolute silence. Morrison's mouth hung open. Chen's eyes were wide. Brennan stood frozen, binoculars raised, unable to process what he'd just witnessed. Alina worked the bolt, ejecting the spent brass. Steam rose from the chamber. She engaged the safety with a soft click, then sat back on her heels, breathing like she'd run a marathon. Her hands were shaking now, not from recoil, from memory. Dad, I just broke your promise. I'm sorry, but I needed them to understand. Check it. Brennan's voice cut through shock. Check the target right now. Chen ran to the spotting scope, adjusted magnification. Through swirling snow, she could see the steel plate dead center, a fresh impact crater. Metal peeled back, LED lights still flashing. Confirmed hit, Chen said, voice hollow. Center mass. Perfect score. Morrison walked to where brass had landed in snow. He picked it up, stared at it like it was alien technology. How? That's not possible. The wind was changing every 3 seconds. It changed twice during flight. Elena said quietly, I fired between transitions. You can't predict that, Morrison said. Nobody can predict that. I didn't predict it. I felt it. Brennan lowered his binoculars. Corporal Chen, pull up the high-speed camera footage. I want frame-by-frame analysis of that shot. They crowded around Chen's tablet. The footage played in slow motion, Elena's finger pressing trigger. Muzzle flash blooming, bullet trace visible through snow. And there it was, the trajectory that shouldn't work. The curve at 800 meters, where the bullet seemed to defy gravity, bending right when everything said it should go left, then correcting at 200 meters to resume true flight. That's not a normal ballistic arc, Chen whispered. Because it's not normal wind, Elena said. She stood, legs unsteady. The thermal inversion creates a pocket of different air density. Bullets don't fly straight through it. They ride it like a wave. And you calculated that in your head? Brennan asked. No. I learned it from watching my father shoot in Alaska. He taught me that wind isn't math. It's music. You don't calculate it. You listen. Morrison was still staring at the brass casing. You just broke a 15-year record. Do you understand that? Delta's best shooters have tried 42 times. You did it on one attempt. Elena shouldered her rifle. My father could have done it blindfolded. Your father, Brennan said slowly. What was his name? Thomas Ward. Former Marine Scout sniper instructor. He died 6 years ago on a contracted mission. Recognition flashed across Brennan's face. Thomas Ward, the Alaska instructor. He trained 3 of our current team leaders. Then you know he was good. I know he was legendary. And you're his daughter. Elena nodded once. Brennan looked at the target, then back at Elena. Miss Ward, we need to talk officially about who you are and what you just did. I'm nobody, Elena said. Just a woman who wanted to prove her father was right about something. About what? Elena picked up her rifle case. That the bullet doesn't choose gender. It chooses the person who understands wind. She walked toward the weather station, leaving 6 Delta operators standing in snow, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Chen broke the silence. Sir, we need to add her name to the record board. Brennan was already on his radio. Command, this is Brennan. We just had a civilian break our 15-year range record. I need authorization to... He paused, listening. His expression changed. Understood. When? How long do we have? He lowered the radio. What is it? Chen asked. Brennan looked toward the weather station where Elena had disappeared. We've got a situation. Hostage rescue team pinned down in Montana backcountry. Enemy sniper engagement. Extreme winter conditions, blizzard, high wind. Targets at 1-800+ meters. Command wants Delta response. They want our best cold weather sharpshooter. Someone who can read this kind of wind. Brennan paused. They want whoever just made that shot. Morrison's eyes widened. You mean get Elena Ward? Tell her we need her help. And tell her people are going to die if she says no. Elena sat in the weather station. Hands wrapped around hot coffee she couldn't taste. The rifle lay on the desk in front of her, metal still cold from outside air. She hadn't looked at it since setting it down. The door opened. Brennan entered, followed by Chen. Their expressions were serious. Miss Ward, Brennan began. Elena, I need to be direct because we don't have time for anything else. There's a situation developing in Montana. FBI hostage rescue team engaged with armed suspects in winter conditions similar to this. They have a sniper, single shooter, extremely skilled, using terrain and weather to pin down our people. 3 agents wounded. Extraction team can't approach because of the shooter. Elena's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. The sniper's firing from approximately 800 meters using storm cover. Our people can't locate him, can't predict his shots, and can't counter-snipe because wind conditions are too unpredictable. You have Delta snipers, Elena said quietly. We do. Best in the military. But what we just saw out there... Brennan gestured toward the range. That wasn't military training. That was something else. A skill set that might be exactly what we need. I'm not a soldier. I know. But you're the daughter of one. And you just made a shot that 42 trained operators couldn't make. That means something. Elena set down her coffee. It means I got lucky, did you? Chen asked. Because that didn't look like luck. That looked like mastery. Silence stretched. Outside, wind howled against windows. I made a promise, Elena finally said. After my father died, I promised I'd never shoot to kill again. This isn't about killing, Brennan said. This is about protecting. There's a difference. I's there. My father thought so. He made a choice in a situation like this, risky shot to save hostages instead of guaranteed hit on the threat. The shot missed. He died. So I'm not sure there's as much difference as you think. Chen sat across from Elena. Your father saved 4 people before he died. Did you know that? I heard. And you think he made the wrong choice? Elena's jaw tightened. I think he made the choice that cost me my father. That's fair, Chen said. But those 4 people gotta go home to their families. Someone's father, someone's son, someone's sister, someone's daughter. They lived because Thomas Ward understood that the shot matters less than who you're protecting. Don't, Elena's voice cracked. Don't use his philosophy against me. I'm not, Chen said gently. I'm reminding you that his philosophy included you. He taught you everything because he believed you'd use it correctly. Are you saying he was wrong? Elena's hands fisted. And 3 FBI agents are bleeding in Montana snow right now, Brennan said, along with 7 hostages, family of 4 plus 3 ranch workers. All of them are in immediate danger because one person decided human life doesn't matter as much as his ideology. You don't need me. We have good shooters, Brennan interrupted. You have something different. Your father gave you a gift. How you use it, that's your choice. But choosing not to use it, that's still a choice. Elena stared at the rifle. Thomas Ward had built it for impossible shots, had taught her to read wind that others couldn't see, had died proving that some shots were worth taking, even if they cost everything. But he also taught me that bullets don't discriminate. They don't care about your reasons. They just fly true and destroy what they hit. If I go, Elena said slowly, I'm not killing anyone. The priority is protecting our people and the hostages, Brennan said. If you can disable the threat without lethal force, that's your call. But I need to know, can you make the shot if you have to? Could she? 6 years of distance. 6 years of keeping her finger off triggers. 6 years of pretending that part of her life was over. But it wasn't over. It had just been waiting. How long do I have to decide? Elena asked. Helicopter leaves in 20 minutes. That's not much time. People are dying. There is no time. Elena picked up the rifle, felt its familiar weight. Her father's fingerprints were still on the stock, worn smooth by years of handling. He'd carried this weapon through snow and rain and wind, had trusted it with lives. Now she was supposed to do the same? Dad, if you were here, what would you tell me? But she knew. He'd said it 100 times. The rifle doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about your purpose. Know your purpose and the shot takes care of itself. Her purpose? Protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Not revenge. Not ideology, just stopping harm before it happened. Maybe that was different enough from killing, maybe? I'll go, Elena said. But I need conditions. I call the shot. I decide when and how. Nobody pressures me. Nobody second guesses me. If I say the wind's wrong, we wait. Agreed, Brennan said immediately. And if I can wound instead of kill, that's what I do. As long as the threat is neutralized. Elena stood, rifle in hand. Then let's go save some people. The helicopter touched down 800 meters from the crisis point. Snow immediately invaded the cabin, wind trying to tear doors from hinges. Elena jumped out, rifle case in one hand, weather instruments in the other. The scene was chaos. FBI vehicles formed a perimeter, agents crouched behind cover, occasionally taking fire from the ridge above. Medical personnel worked on 3 wounded, gut shot, shoulder shot, leg shot, all stable but deteriorating. The FBI commander, a man named Garrett, met them immediately. Your Delta support. This is Elena Ward, Brennan said. She's your counter, sniper. Garrett looked at Elena's small, young, civilian clothes, and his expression said everything. You're joking. She just broke Delta's 15-year range record, Chen said, and weather worse than this. I don't care if she broke Olympic records. This is a combat situation with an active hostile. I need experienced. You need someone who can read this wind. Elena interrupted, already scanning the ridge. Where's the shooter positioned? Garrett hesitated, then pulled out a tactical map. Best guess, somewhere in this zone, 700 to 900 meters from our position. He's using snow for concealment, taking shots when visibility drops, then relocating. We can't pin him down. What's he shooting? Unknown caliber. Precision rifle. Hits hard enough to punch through vehicle doors. Elena studied the ridge. How many shots has he taken? 12 over the last hour. 7 near misses, 3 hits, 2 complete misses. Where did the misses land? Why does that matter? Because misses tell me how he's calculating wind. Show me. Reluctantly, Garrett pointed out impact zones. Elena cross-referenced them with wind direction, time of fire, target movement. A pattern emerged. The shooter was good, but not great. He was overcompensating for the primary wind layer and completely missing the thermal inversion that Elena had exploited at Fort Bragg. He's readable, Elena said. That means beatable. You can take him? Garrett asked. If I can see him, yes. That's the problem. We can't locate him. Every time we send a drone up, wind knocks it off course. Thermals are useless in this cold. He's a ghost. Elena shook her head. No, he's wind locked. Same as Delta was this morning. He doesn't understand the third layer, so he's taking longer to calculate each shot. That's why his rate of fire is slow. Slow works for him. We're pinned. It also means he's stationary, Elena said. He can't afford to relocate because he'd lose his reference points. He's committed to one position. Chen saw where Elena was going. So if we can predict his next shot based on pattern, we can trace the ballistic back to source. And I can take the counter shot during his firing sequence while he's distracted. Brennan nodded. That's aggressive. You'll be exposed. So will he. Garrett looked between them. You're telling me this civilian is going to outduel a hostile sniper in blizzard conditions based on wind theory? Yes, Elena said simply. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And if you're wrong, then people die. But if I don't try, people die anyway. At least this way. We're fighting back. Garrett stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Your shot, but my responsibility. If this goes wrong, it won't, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. They set up a firing position behind an overturned vehicle. Elena assembled her rifle, hands moving through the familiar ritual load magazine. Chamber round, adjust scope, set bipod. Her father's voice in her head, preparation is 90% of the shot. The other 10% is just breath control. How do you want to play this? Brennan asked. I need bait. Someone to draw his next shot so I can get a read on his position. I'll do it, Chen volunteered immediately. No, Elena said. It needs to be worth his time. A high-value target moving in the open. Then it's me, Garrett said. I'm the IC. He'll want that shot. Elena nodded. Move from vehicle to vehicle. 5 seconds exposed, then cover. Don't run straight. Make him calculate for lateral movement. That'll give me time to track his muzzle flash. And if he hits me, I shoot before he pulls the trigger. Not exactly reassuring. But Garrett was career FBI. Had faced worse odds. He positioned himself, waited for Elena's signal. Elena pressed her eye to scope, watched the ridge, felt the wind against her face. Layered complex, alive. The first layer was obvious northwest, steady at 12 knots. The second layer was trickier mountain downdraft, southeast at 18. But the third layer, she closed her eyes, feeling for it with senses beyond sight. There, thermal inversion between 900 and 400 meters, rising heat from the valley floor, creating a zone of stable air. Any bullet passing through would compress slightly, trajectory rising before falling back to true path. The hostile shooter didn't know about that layer. He was compensating for what he could measure, missing what he couldn't. That would kill him or save him, depending on whether Elena's first shot landed. She said quietly. Garrett broke cover. Garrett ran, 5 seconds of exposure. Snow kicked up around his boots. 20 meters from vehicle to vehicle. Long enough to draw attention. Long enough to die. Elena didn't watch Garrett. She watched the ridge, eyes tracing the logical firing positions. If she were the hostile, where would she hide? Elevation advantage, wind protection, clear sight lines. Her mind ran calculations, terrain analysis, ballistic geometry, human psychology. They're a formation of rocks at 843 meters. Perfect elevation, sheltered from worst wind, commanding view of the entire valley. If she wanted to pin down an enemy force, that's where she'd set up. 3 seconds, Chen said quietly, tracking Garrett's run. Elena adjusted her scope, found the rocks, searched for any sign movement, muzzle flash, scope glint. Nothing. Just gray stone and white snow. And there the tiniest disturbance in falling snow, air pressure displaced by human breath in cold. Invisible to anyone not trained to see it. But Elena had grown up reading Alaska wind. She'd learned to spot the absence of natural pattern. Someone was breathing behind those rocks. 2 seconds. Elena calculated distance, wind layers, thermal inversion. Her father's voicey, trust the wind. It'll carry you true. 1 second. Muzzle flash bloomed from the rocks. Elena fired in the same instant. 2 bullets ripped through storm. One aimed at Garrett, one aimed at the hidden shooter. Physics played out in microseconds. The hostile's round followed his calculations, compensated for primary wind, adjusted for distance, but missing the thermal layer entirely. The bullet curved wrong at 200 meters, dropped too fast, hit snow 2 meters ahead of where Garrett had been, would have been if he hadn't already dove behind cover. Elena's round followed different mathematics. She'd accounted for all 3 wind layers, had timed her shot for the brief moment when thermal inversion was stable, had aimed not where the target was, but where the thermal wave would carry her bullet. The 338 Lapua round punched through snow, rode the invisible wind tunnel, emerged on target trajectory at 700 meters, and struck the rocks 3 inches left of the muzzle flash. Stone exploded. A human scream cut through wind. High, sharp pain and surprise. Hit, Chen called. Target hit. But Elena was already working the bolt, chambering the second round. Because she'd aimed for the rock, not the person, had deliberately ricocheted the bullet to wound, not kill. And wounded meant dangerous. Wounded meant unpredictable. She kept the scope on target. Movement in the rocks. The hostile was shifting position, trying to set up a second shot despite the pain. Elena saw blood on snow shoulder wound based on the way he was moving. Not fatal, but definitely limiting his ability to shoot accurately. He's relocating, Brennan said. You want another shot? Elena tracked the movement. The hostile was crawling, weapon in one hand, clearly struggling. He reached a secondary position, started to raise his rifle. Don't? Elena whispered, not to Brennan, to the man 843 meters away, but he didn't hear or didn't care. The rifle came up. Elena's second shot shattered his scope. The hostile jerked back, weapon flying from hands not hit, at least not badly, but his optics were destroyed. His shooting hand likely cut by fragmented glass. He was effectively neutralized. Target disabled, Elena said the team. FBI tactical units moved immediately, advancing under covering fire. The hostile didn't resist. Couldn't resist with the wounded shoulder and ruined rifle. They hauled him from the rocks 6 minutes later, bleeding and cursing, but alive. Garrett returned to the command post, breathing hard. You shot past me. I felt the wake from your bullet. You were never in danger, Elena said, shaking. I timed it. Timed it, Garrett repeated. You fired at the same instant he did, in a blizzard, and threaded your shot past my head to hit a target almost 2 kilometers away. I aimed for the rocks, not him. Ricochet wound only. His scope second. I wasn't trying to kill.
Why not?
Morrison asked. He'd arrived with the second wave. He was trying to kill us. Elena packed her rifle with careful movements. Because that's not what my father taught me. He taught me that every bullet matters. Every trigger pull is a choice, and I choose not to kill unless there's absolutely no other option. There might not have been another option, Brennan said. If your first shot missed, it didn't. But if it had, Elena met his eyes. Then I would have made a different choice. But it didn't miss, so I didn't have to. The rescued hostages were being loaded into ambulances, shaken, hypothermic, but alive. The 3 wounded agents were stabilized. The hostile shooter was cuffed and receiving medical treatment. Nobody had died. Elena had kept her promise, mostly. The part where she'd fired 2 shots in combat situations, where she'd deliberately targeted another human being, where she'd chosen violence. Even if it was minimal, that part still felt like betrayal. Her father would have understood, but understanding didn't make it easier. Miss Ward, Garrett extended his hand. You saved lives today. However you feel about what you did, that's what happened. You saved lives. Elena shook his hand, felt the calluses of another person who'd pulled triggers for the right reasons. Thank you. Delta wants to debrief you. Probably offer you a position. I'm not interested. You should be. That was the most impressive counter-sniper work I've seen in 20 years. Elena shouldered her rifle case. That's kind, but I'm just a weather analyst who had one good day. I'd like to go back to being that. She walked toward the helicopter, leaving questions and offers behind, but she felt eyes on her back, felt the weight of what she'd proven. One good day, she'd said, but everyone there knew better. One good day was luck. What Elena had done was skill, and skill like that didn't just disappear. Delta Force was going to come calling. The only question was whether she'd answer. 3 weeks later, Elena stood at Fort Bragg's sniper range again, same snow, same wind, same impossible target at 1,923 meters. But this time she wasn't alone. The entire Delta sniper unit was there, plus brass from JSOC, plus FBI representatives, plus more people than Elena had ever wanted to be in front of at once. Brennan approached with a tablet. Final ballistic analysis from Montana. Your first shot, the ricochet, traveled 1,843 meters through 3 distinct wind layers, compressed through a thermal inversion, and struck exactly where you aimed. Margin of error 2.1 inches. Wind was cooperating, Elena said. The wind was chaotic. You cooperated with it. He showed her the data. Second shot, through the scope, traveled the same distance with even worse conditions because storm intensified. You adjusted mid-calculation and still hit center glass. There are Olympic shooters who can't do that on a clear date. My father could have done it. I know, because I looked up his records. Captain Thomas Ward, Marine Scout sniper instructor, credited with developing advanced wind reading techniques that are still classified, trained 47 operators over 12 years, died during a contracted hostage rescue operation in 2019. Elena's throat tightened. You didn't need to research that. I did, Brennan said gently, because I needed to understand who taught you. And now I understand you weren't trained by just anyone. You were trained by the man who wrote half our long-range protocols. He wasn't perfect. No, but he was legendary. And you're his legacy. Behind them, workers were updating the range record board. Elena's name went up in fresh letters. New record. Elena Ward, 1,923 meters winter shot. First civilian to break Delta standard, but Brennan showed her something else. There's a proposal to do something different. Command approved it this morning. He turned the tablet. Instead of 1 record, the board would now show 2. Legacy record Thomas Ward, 40 meters, Alaska Range 2018. Current record Elena Ward, 1,923 meters, Fort Bragg 2025. Elena's vision blurred. You found his record. 8 was archived civilian training documentation. He made that shot during a demonstration for military observers. 2 40 meters in crosswind conditions rated impossible by meteorological standards. Sound familiar? Never told me about that shot, because he wasn't the kind of man who bragged. But the shot existed, and now it's going to be honored alongside yours. Elena touched the tablet screen, tracing her father's name. "Why are you doing this?" "Because legends deserve recognition, both the old ones and the new ones." The ceremony was brief. Military events always were. They presented Alina with a plaque she didn't want, offered her a position she wouldn't accept, and thanked her for service she'd never intended to give. But when they revealed the dual record board, when Thomas Ward's name appeared next to hers, Alina cried, didn't try to hide it. Let the tears freeze on her cheeks in Fort Bragg wind that her father would have understood perfectly. Morrison approached after, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I was an ass when we first met. You were frustrated. I understand. No, I was an ass, and I'm sorry." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was her spent brass from the Montana operation, both casings mounted on a wooden display base with an engraved plate. 2 shots, 0 kills, multiple lives saved. The philosophy of Thomas Ward. Executed by Alina Ward. "I don't know if this is appropriate," Morrison said, but it felt like it needed to exist. Alina accepted it with shaking hands. "It's perfect. Thank you." Chen joined them. "Command's officially requesting you as a civilian consultant. Quarterly reviews of sniper protocols, weather analysis for special operations, payments excellent, no combat requirements." "I appreciate the offer." "You're not interested." "I'm a weather analyst. I want to stay a weather analyst, even though you're one of the best snipers alive." Alina looked at the record board, her name and her father's together in history. "Especially because I'm one of the best. My father taught me that skill without purpose is just ability. I don't want to be a soldier. I never did. I want to understand wind and help people understand wind. That's enough purpose for me." "What about when we need you again?" Brennan asked. "Another impossible situation. Another choice between helping and walking away." "Then I'll make that choice when it comes. But I won't make it now. I won't commit to violence just because I'm capable of it." They stood in cold wind, watching snow fall across the range where Alina had broken a record, started a legend, and proven her father's philosophy correct. A Delta operator stepped to the firing line, chambered a round, attempted the 923-meter shot. "They'll keep trying," Chen said, "until someone beats your record." "Good," Alina replied. "That's what records are for, to be broken, to push people to be better." "You think someone will?" "Definitely. Maybe not this year, maybe not next. But someone will understand the wind the way my father did, the way I do. And they'll make a shot we can't imagine right now." "And that doesn't bother you?" Alina smiled for the first time in weeks. "It would have bothered me if nobody tried. But they will, because that's what he taught me. Skill isn't about being the best forever. It's about being excellent once and inspiring others to reach for excellence themselves." She packed her rifle case, shook hands with operators who'd mocked her 3 weeks ago, and now looked at her like she was a ghost or a goddess or both. Accepted the ceremonial brass from Morrison, memorized her father's name on the record board. Then she walked back to the weather station, where instruments measured wind that most people couldn't feel and predictions formed for storms most people couldn't imagine. That night, alone in her apartment, Alina took out the brass display Morrison had made. Read the inscription again. "The philosophy of Thomas Ward." Executed by Alina Ward. Her father had believed bullets were tools, not weapons. That shooting wasn't about destruction, but protection. That the best shot was the one you didn't have to take, and the second best was the one that saved lives instead of ending them. She'd proven his philosophy could work in combat, in chaos, in conditions where perfection was the only acceptable result. But she'd also proven something else: she could live with herself afterward. That was the real victory, not the record, not the legend. The knowledge that she'd faced the choice her father had faced, and she'd found a way through it that honored his memory without betraying her promise. "I hope you're proud, Dad," she whispered to empty room. "I hope wherever you are you saw what I did, and I hope you understand why I won't do it again unless absolutely necessary." Outside, wind rattled windows, the same wind that had carried her bullet true, the same wind her father had taught her to read like language. She would keep analyzing that wind, keep helping shooters understand it, keep living the civilian life she'd chosen. But the rifle stayed ready. The skills stayed sharp because principles and promises could coexist with preparedness. And if Fort Bragg called again, if another impossible situation demanded impossible shots, she would make the same choice. She would listen to the wind, trust her training, and do whatever it took to send people home alive. That was the legacy of Thomas Ward, and now it was the legacy of Alina Ward too. The record board at Fort Bragg said as much: two names, two legends, father and daughter, separated by time, but united by understanding that some skills were meant not to dominate, but to protect. The blizzard outside intensified. Somewhere in that storm, wind layers shifted and collided. Thermal inversions formed and collapsed. The invisible forces that made shooting impossible became temporarily readable to those who knew how to listen. Elena smiled. Her father would have loved this weather.